Hi everyone, I'm Steph Hopper and I'm a director of the talent practice at Catfinity, and I'm joined by my co-host Celine Floyd, and Celine will introduce herself shortly. Welcome to our latest episode, but a few words first of all on Catfinity. We're a global business. We're based in Birmingham, London, Dublin, various US locations and Sydney, Australia, and we've been helping organisations to find candidates, develop employees and transform their business around our USP of strengths-based assessment and development for well over 16 years. Celine and I head up the talent practice together. We support organisations to identify and develop their talent all the way through from early careers to their exec leadership through a market-leading method of strengths. Welcome back, Celine. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm well, thank you, Steph. How are you? Good to see you again. Our 35th episode. And as you can see, we're joined by two more fantastic guests who will introduce themselves shortly. So as Steph said, one of the co-directors of the talent practice, an occupational psychologist by training and been in consultancy for coming up to 20 years. This episode, our 35th episode of Be Strong, is a really interesting and important one. Our focus today is on a culture of belonging, and we know that belonging and inclusion and diversity are really kind of hot and important topics at the moment. So we're really excited to be lifting the lid on this as a group today. And as I said, I'm joined by two fantastic women who I will now ask to introduce. Catharine, if I may come to you first, could you please just tell the audience a little bit about you and your career and perhaps why you find leadership as a broad topic so interesting?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, so I'm Catharine Williams. I'm a HR generalist, I think probably by trade is the best way to describe it. And I've had a career always working in that field. But where perhaps that's differed is I've worked across a range of different industries and different kinds of organizations. So I can kind of split my career into three parts. One part working for really large multinational organizations where really scale and complexity is typical. So organizations like Shell or Barclays Financial Services in the UK. I've also spent time in some very kind of fast moving American pacey organizations, tech in particular with Expedia Group and e-bookers and some advertising agencies. And then a third kind of section of my career has really been working for myself as a consultant, focusing on leadership in particular, so coaching using Gallup and Hogan, and management development programs, and also helping small startups as they think about the talent of and their culture and what their strategy is in terms of people, helping them develop. So for me, it's been really an interesting career because while I've always stayed in HR, the industry's changed, and the consistent thing is that people are people. So you do experience similar kind of challenges. So for example, of culture and belonging, whether that's a massive organization or a small organization. So I find it really interesting to say, well, how can I take what I've learned from very different areas and apply them in a new way, perhaps to the environment in which I find myself.
Amazing. Thank you, Catharine. Such a wonderfully eclectic career with lots of different insights, which I'm really looking forward to hearing more about. And you mentioned American companies there, which is a lovely link into Deborah, who is joining us today from the Big Apple. It's a sunny morning, Deborah tells us, in New York. Deborah, really welcome to the session. Perhaps you could do the same, tell us a bit about yourself and why the topic of leadership is interesting to you.
Great. Thanks, Celine. I'm so happy to be joining and happy to reconnect with Stephanie again after many years. So I have spent my career similar to Catharine, working in both large and small companies. So the first part of my career, and a big piece of it, was spent at Thomson and Thomson Reuters, which was, a collection of companies where I had a wonderful opportunity to, in the early part of my career, focus on organizational development. And at that point in time, organizational development wasn't actually a part of HR. It was part of a strategy function or a COO. And what that meant really was facilitating leaders and businesses around things like restructuring and mission, vision, purpose, values, all the things that we talk so much about in the HR world today. Fast forward a bit, the OD practice moved into the HR function. At that time, I was given the opportunity to really sort of expand the breadth of my area of focus into the talent space, which was something I learned that I really loved. And that was, things like performance, succession planning, talent assessment. But one of the highlights for me was running the corporate university. And during that time, it was very much focused on leadership development and things like, how do we bring emotional intelligence, into the leadership language, right? Particularly where we had been a collection of small companies and we had leaders that were had grown up being, very forceful and because of what they've been able to accomplish, not necessarily for the style. And so that was a wonderful opportunity. When at the integration of Thomson and Reuters, I took on responsibility for the organizational development and talent practice for all of markets, which at that time ended up becoming 30,000 employees around the globe. Yeah. So my team was very global. We worked on some wonderful initiatives from, hypo planning to women's leadership initiatives to, maybe some more traditional things. But it was really at the core of the people strategy. And I thoroughly enjoyed that time. But when I left there, I was very intentional about saying I wanted to go to some place smaller where I could have very direct impact and brought in, frankly, my own experiences. So for the last 10 years, I've been in chief people officer, chief HR officer roles in sort of mid-sized companies, all technology, mostly fintech. So payments, now the business that I'm in is in an analytics and indices business, but all very global. So they have some similar sort of traits to, the bigger companies in the global in nature and complex products, but the ability to kind of be flexible and really get to know the people. And what I love about this conversation is, creating, particularly in a smaller company, you really have the ability to shape what that culture is and touch what, get a sense of what belonging means to individuals, even maybe in a richer, faster way anyway, than when you're in a larger company. So it's been a wonderful experience. On the topic of leadership, I would say at its core, I've seen the impact that leaders can have on the success of the business. And I don't mean because of their intellectual skills or on their drive, but on the people, right? I mean, we've heard so often how people join companies, they leave managers, right? And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So what I love is being able to have that impact on leaders that then transpires, through the rest of the organization.
Brilliant. Thank you, Deb. Lovely link into today's topic. And as we're all about belonging today, I'm pleased that Catherine's dog's also on board with the event as well. Don't worry, we're dog owners as well.
Yeah.
Don't worry at all. So I guess social belonging is it's a fundamental human and carnivore need, hardwired into our DNA. And research has shown that individual feelings of belonging in the workplace really vary drastically. So 40% of people say they feel isolated at work, and the result has been, lower commitment to the organisation and lower engagement. So it's important to create the right environment, as high belonging has been linked to a 56% increase in job performance and a drop in turnover risk and a 75% reduction in sick days, which is quite incredible. According to research by a small non-profit think tank called Qontigo, they say that a sense of belonging at work is rooted in 4 different elements, which I'm sure we're probably going to end up touching on today. One is being seen. One is being connected, another is being supported, and finally being proud of and aligned to your organisation's values and purpose. So let me start with our first question, and I'll come to Deb first of all. What does it mean, Deb, for you to belong at work, and what do you think a culture of belonging looks like in today's world in 2022?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and we spend a lot of time thinking about this, Stephanie. And I would put it really into three buckets, right? I mean, first of all, yes, we all want to feel connected. We all want to feel like when we go to work, wherever go to work is, right, that we have our people, we have our tribe, we feel proud of it, we feel connected. And to me, that really means that, one, I'm respected, right? I feel that I am treated with respect. There is an environment of respect, and that's in the behaviors, it's in the social norms in the company. It means that, two, that there's psychological safety, right? And that to me is about being able to bring my authentic self to this. I mean, we talk about that, and it sounds a little cliche, but really, how do I show up and how can I express who I am? Some people are very outgoing, others are not. Is that okay? We all have different interests. How do I show up and not be judged and feel that I can share my opinions and whatnot? So I think respect, psychological safety. And then I think the other big one to me is around purpose, right? So particularly now, I mean, I think we're in such an interesting time because COVID has really challenged our conventional thinking around what it means to belong. When now, the person or the live thing that I speak to most is my dog, right? It's my work companion often. We're not always in the office. In some cases, we're challenged getting people back into the office. So the sense of belonging really changes. It's not as much about place. I think previously it would have been very much about connecting to a place, and you could feel, sort of feel what the environment was. And so now I think it's really, I think what a lot of people are looking for is a sense of purpose. Do I find purpose in my work? Do I feel connection in the work that I do? Do I see line of sight between what I do and what the company does? So things like alignment of goals, real clarity of mission and vision of the company. Particularly I think in some of our younger generations, there is a real interest in, like, is the company doing good? What is the purpose of the company, right? So it's not only my purpose, but the purpose for the company, and feeling connected to those things.
I love that, Deb. And I think you're so right that place used to define a lot of this, and now that's just been thrown right out the window, hasn't it? And the way we feel that sense of belonging is, as you said, very different. Catherine, what are your thoughts on maybe Deb's thoughts, but also just generally on what it means to belong at work?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And it's so interesting to hear someone else vocalize your kind of thoughts on the matter. And also just to, I suppose, iterate is that, now we know that employees, for example, choose their organization in the same way that they would choose a brand that they consume. So to the value point, no longer are you judged on some clinical factor. It really is, does this speak to me and do I feel aligned? So I think that is absolutely one of the key things. I think just to build, I suppose, on what Deb said, if that's the organizational piece, I think at a personal level, it's really important to just feel that you can show up and be your kind of true self. And, when I just think about my own experience of that over my career, there's been times where you're either starting out and you feel that you either need to fill in some kind of conformity of what that should look like, or you find yourself on a leadership team for the first time or a new team and feeling that you've got to conform to a norm, maybe rather than being your true self. And I think where people really feel belonging is that they can just be themselves. the good, the bad, and the ugly in the nicest ways. We all get things right. We sometimes get things wrong, but it's safe to do that. And I think where belonging really works well and starts to be important and create all of the benefits you articulated earlier, Steph, is where we start to see belonging of people who are very different to each other. So you can show up as your authentic self, but also what makes you so special and unique and valued is that you have a different view to people. It might be you have a similar perspective to others, but that we find a culture where we say, knowing that someone has a other view might help us with blind spots, might help to develop our more kind of creative thinking, and allow us to represent whatever it is we're trying to produce in a way that's more rounded and meaningful. So where I've experienced it well is that people feel comfortable, that they have a safe environment, to the point that Deb's made, and that they're free to actually kind of take a risk and say something that's different to the norm, and that's thoughtfully received and reflected on and valued.
And it's quite interesting actually, Catherine, because we had Celine and I hosted, it's just coming back to me, and Celine might remember it better than me. We hosted an exec breakfast, and we had a guest speaker who'd written a book on inclusion. And one of those things she said at the beginning, which I really loved, was belonging is easy when we're all the same. And actually, the danger is you hire people who are like you, because actually that creates a very comfortable culture. The minute you bring in that diversity, then creating inclusion and belonging is really hard, because that's where we spike up against each other.
I think that's exactly right, Steph. And I think, when you think about relationships outside of work, you go to different people for different things. No one person can be everything for you. And quite often, in your home life, your relationships end up being the closest with people who are your exact opposite. Because if you're exactly the same, sometimes that's not a good thing. But yet in the workplace, conformity can sometimes feel like an ambition. Whereas in reality, when someone has an alternative or supporting perspective to you, then actually it is much more beneficial in the long run. So, I do think that recognizing similarity and differences, but seeing that both of them are equally valuable really helps in terms of your culture.
I would just wonder also, Celine, on that point, if this is one of the areas where, COVID and our work from home has actually helped us, right? It's taken out some of the expectation of all being exactly the same. And in some respects, because we're in video, like we're seeing into people's homes and, personal lives and whatnot. And you get to see a little bit more about who they are as a human, their family, their kids are coming in and whatnot. And it's, maybe it's taught us to be a little bit more accepting.
And definitely, I would agree, and definitely more accepting of people's authentic selves. I think there's been some fascinating research, hasn't there, around actually people's comfort with being authentic and being themselves rising. The counter research, which is also fascinating, one of the things that happened in 2020, and I think it was Microsoft published research that showed that people's networks really shrunk, in that we in the virtual world, we talking to far fewer people and actually engaging with people predominantly just in our trusted circle. And so perhaps one of the things we have lost is this coming into contact with people that aren't in our group, and maybe that's one of the dangers. And I think listening to the conversation so far, it's been fascinating, because I think we're all bought into this idea of a culture of belonging, and everyone buys into this idea of inclusion. But I think in reality, it's quite hard to execute, isn't it? And the office piece is interesting, because if you've got a brand and the colours and the way that offices were, have been designed to bring people together with open spaces, open plan kitchens, it is more tricky. And then when you layer on every other challenge that we're all up against in this modern world around, time pressure, deadlines, goals. We spoke about how we all want to try and find meaning and purpose in what we do. It's a pretty complex landscape. And so I wonder if we can come on to perhaps sharing with the group, any hints and tips that we have for leaders actually, around how can leaders facilitate a culture of belonging, and what challenges are they facing beyond what we've already discussed. So Debs, perhaps coming to you first.
Sure.
What can leaders be doing here?
So I think the word that comes to mind for me, Celine, is being intentional, right? I think at the beginning of COVID, we would get on a Zoom call or on a Microsoft Teams call, right? And you jump right into the meeting purpose and an agenda. And we miss out on all of those things that we would have had we been in the workplace. Like as you're walking into the conference room and I say, Celine, how was your weekend? How are your kids? How did, the start of school go? Like some of the personal niceties that make you actually connect as humans. We miss that. And so we've been very efficient in our time. But so one, I would say, is being really intentional about creating the relationships and checking in. And so, when I talk to my leaders and say, take a couple minutes at the beginning of the call and ask people how they're doing. Find out things about them personally. I mean, think about the number of people who have changed jobs during COVID that haven't had the opportunity to actually even go into the office and meet somebody. I was one of those people. It took me 4 months before I met anyone on my team in person. Wow. So it was really hard. So I think taking the time to develop sort of intimate relationships where you actually know things about people, know what matters to them, both in their professional life and, in their personal life. And then the second piece I would say, going back to, my earlier comments, is around creating purpose at work, right? So making sure that we're communicating really well. I think as leaders, we have to be great communicators. We have to communicate often. We have to make the connections between like where we're trying to go, why things matter, and why, you as the employee on this team matter and fit in. And then lastly, just on the, on this point of respect, creating that environment of respect. And so we have to not only walk the talk, but be facilitators really of like, some good behaviors, making sure that we don't have people dominating on calls, that we're very conscious in our hiring practices. So we don't have everybody that looks, just like us, that we are inclusive in, in terms of getting diverse opinions around things. So I would say those are the big three for me.
Fantastic. Wonderful tips. Love all of them. Brilliant. Catharine, does that align with the hints that you would have for leaders?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's exactly right. And, I think as leaders, your role is that one of, invitation, exactly as Debs is saying, you are, showing up, you are role modeling all the time. So whether you remember or not, you are kind of on a stage and you have to be very intentional, as Deb says, in what you do. I think one of the, if I kind of make that even more personal at all levels in the organization, it would be that when you have been somewhere for a while, or if you are a leader, it's sometimes easy to forget what that experience of not belonging feels like. And you do all the intentional things exactly as, Debs has said. I think that's right. But sometimes it's those kind of other moments that have the biggest impact on people. So I think it's always worth, in addition, remembering, where do people experience that sense of belonging and where is there a risk to that? And we know the kind of couple of key things are when somebody asks a question, there's a risk in that in terms of how it's received and whether people have felt to belong. When people ask for help or when people share an idea, just by our reaction to that, we give a subtle implicit message on whether they belong and whether they've kind of landed it in a way that's okay. So that's just something to remember as a facilitator of the experience of others to belong. I think all of us can take an action to do. And then just, exactly building on what Deb's saying is, for me, belonging and trust are really very kind of close together. So if you want to create a culture where people feel empowered, have autonomy and be trusted, then if you start with a feeling of belonging, you're probably on a good path. So at an organizational level, I think it's really important, if you have the ability to do that, is A, to kind of role model, what you want to see, and B, just communicate what you see around you, when you've welcomed a distinctive perspective, or where you've had a change of mind because someone has put an alternative view, and where you've appreciated having different people belonging to your organization for what they bring. It just allows people, if they see it, they can be it. So it's always worth sharing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So another really rich episode. So in summary, I guess, we've talked a lot about the need to have an environment of respect. We've touched on psychological safety, and being able to create a place where we can be our authentic selves. Both Catharine and Deb talked about that. And then also both of them referred to the importance of purpose, being really clear on what the overall organisation mission is, but then helping people align their goals with that so that they feel really clear on how they make a contribution within the organisation. And I think the other thing that I picked up on was just the importance as a leader of being intentional in our actions. And I loved some of Catharine's tips there around, complacency that can set in when we've maybe been somewhere for a while, and actually how important it is to keep modelling that, sort of sense of belonging when someone asks a question or asks for help, or shares an idea, maybe takes a risk, to encourage that. So just to bring things to a close, I'd just love a final thought from everybody. So let me come to Catharine first this time. What's your parting thought, Catharine?
I think when it comes to belonging, I think we are all leaders. I don't think we should look to anybody else to lead the way on that. I think we can choose how we show up, and role modeling a sense of belonging yourself and encouraging others to belong is absolutely a gift that we all have to give.
Thank you. And Deb, final word from you.
Oh, so mine is quite similar, Stephanie. I would say that leaders make the difference, right? And so we need to take the personal responsibility for the belonging of our employees, and it pays back, in spades. So the more we put into that, the more intentional that we are, the greater rewards that we all reap.
Brilliant. And Celine?
Yeah, I think one thing that stuck with me from the conversation today is that we all have a responsibility to be courageous with this and to call out those things happening within our organisations that pose a threat to people feeling like they belong. And I'm with Catharine that that's really on everyone, but predominantly with those that everyone is looking to on the stage, and should all be championing and role modelling. And it's a difficult tightrope to walk between celebrating everybody's individual uniqueness, but making sure that people are behaving within parameters that drive psychological safety. So fascinating, really interesting topic.
Brilliant. Thank you, Celine. Thank you to all our viewers. We're back, I think it's in 3 weeks' time, actually. And next time we're talking about growth mindset. So please join us then. And a final word is that I know that Deb is doing the keynote at the HR Tech Conference in Las Vegas on Friday. So if you're there, please go and see her. And I know we've got a Catfinity stand there as well. So it'll be great to catch Deb's talk or to hop along to our stand as well. So we'll see you in a few weeks' time. Many thanks, Deb. Many thanks, Catharine. And see you all very soon.
Thank you.